Somewhere around 5,000 years ago, an entire civilization was handed a death sentence. Not by war, not by disease, by the sky itself. The rain simply stopped. And when it did, every single person spread across 2 million square miles of grassland had exactly one option left if they wanted to survive: run toward a single, narrow river. This is not the story of how Egypt was built. This is the story of how an entire population was hunted down by drought. And only the ones who reached the Nile in time lived to tell it. To understand how brutal this was, you have to understand how big the Green Sahara actually was. This wasn't a small oasis drying up. This was a landmass larger than the entire United States, collapsing from a fertile grassland into the harshest desert on Earth in the span of a few centuries. Lakes that had sustained life for 6,000 years disappeared within a single lifetime. There was no warning system, no slow decline anyone could adapt to. Just a rapid, merciless erasure of an entire world. Not everyone made it. Archaeological surveys across the Sahara have found the remains of settlements simply abandoned mid-use. Tools left where they fell. Hearths cold. No burial. No ceremony. Some researchers believe entire communities perished where they stood, unable to reach water in time. This is the part of the story that rarely gets told. For every group that successfully migrated to the Nile, there were others who didn't, whose names, cultures, and entire ways of life vanished from the historical record completely, leaving nothing behind but scattered bones half buried in sand. So why the Nile? Because geographically, it was the only reasonable option. To the west, the deepening Sahara, already lethal. To the east, the Red Sea and mountainous terrain, nearly impossible to cross with families and livestock. To the south, further drought, following the same collapsing rain patterns. The Nile was the single consistent water source across the entire region. Fed by rainfall, thousands of miles away in the Ethiopian highlands, completely independent from the collapsing local climate. It wasn't a preferred destination. It was the only place left where water still existed. History is full of forgotten truths. Subscribe and uncover them with us. But here's the problem. The Nile Valley is narrow. In most places, just a few miles of usable farmland, squeezed between endless desert on either side. It was never designed to support the population of an entire vanished continent-sized grassland. As wave after wave of desperate migrants arrived, all converging on this same thin strip of fertile land, something had to give. Resources that once supported a few scattered communities were now expected to feed dramatically larger populations. The stage was set, not for cooperation, but for competition. And the evidence backs this up. Skeletal remains from this period show a disturbing rise in trauma. Skull fractures, defensive wounds, weapon injuries that don't match hunting accidents. Some sites show signs of deliberate, planned attacks between rival groups. This wasn't the peaceful birth of a nation. It was a slow-motion war for survival along the only water source for hundreds of miles. A brutal chapter that most popular retellings of Egyptian history conveniently skip entirely in favor of golden thrones and god-kings. Out of that chaos, something had to emerge to prevent total collapse. Groups that organized quickly, appointing leaders, defending territory, coordinating irrigation and food distribution, were the ones that survived. Groups that didn't disappeared. This intense pressure, applied as over generations, is what many archaeologists believe accelerated the rise of centralized authority in the Nile Valley. Chiefdoms, then kingdoms, then eventually the unified rule of a single pharaoh. In other words, Egypt's earliest kings may not have been chosen by gods. They may have been forged by catastrophe. But survival came at a cost. Countless distinct cultures, languages, and belief systems from across the Green Sahara were compressed, erased, or absorbed into this new, centralized order. Diversity that had existed across millions of square miles for thousands of years was funneled into a single narrow valley, and much of it simply didn't survive the transition. What we call ancient Egyptian culture may actually be the surviving fragments of dozens of older civilizations, fused together under pressure, with their original identities lost almost entirely. This changes the entire foundation story of ancient Egypt. It wasn't a single, isolated culture that spontaneously built pyramids and worshipped cats. It was the surviving product of one of the largest forced migrations in early human history, a fusion of desperate, displaced peoples, compressed by catastrophe into a narrow strip of survivable land. Every symbol of Egyptian power, from the pharaoh's crown to the earliest gods, may carry fragments of cultures we've never even identified, swallowed whole by the very crisis that made Egypt possible in the first place. And the very first identifiable culture to emerge from this chaos, the first people we can actually name, examine, and trace directly into Egypt's future, left behind something unexpected. Not weapons, not thrones, but an obsession so intense, so deeply embedded into everything they made, that it would go on to define Egyptian civilization for the next 3,000 years. A fixation on death and what comes after it. Who were they? That's next.